Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Samantha and this is Trans IRL. Thomas is off on vacation this week in Hawaii, and as you can see, he's having an absolutely terrible time over there. But I'll be hosting tonight and I'm happy to be here. And let's get right into tonight's episode. This week, our guest is an athlete, a trainer, advocate, and husband. He's a dual athlete and triathlete competing at the highest levels in the sport. And to date, he's qualified for Team USA 4 times and has been an essential voice for trans athletes competing at the highest level in sports, including the Olympics. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and welcome Chris Mosier to the show. Hi, Chris.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here tonight. I've been following your story on Instagram for a while now, since actually before I came out. And, I think the work that you've been doing is absolutely amazing. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but there is your Instagram page there at the Chris Mosier for people who are interested in following Chris's story. But let's go ahead and get into it here. I'd like to start by asking you just to share a little bit about your background in athletics and how you got started with racing triathlons.
Yeah, I started off competing in sports when I was probably 4 years old. It was one of the first things that I remember doing in the neighborhood with kids is just everybody went outside and played. So I started off playing t-ball, baseball, and softball. And then in high school, I was a 3-sport all-conference athlete in basketball, volleyball, and softball. I gave up sports in college, but I came back to running after college as sort of a way to connect with my body again and kind of connect to myself, because I found so many friends and community in playing sports when I was a kid, and I really missed that when I stopped doing that in college. So I actually came into triathlon and duathlon as a runner and started off running 4-mile races, 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathon, marathon. I did an ultra marathon, thought, what is next? What's the next way I can push my body? And decided to buy a bike, teach myself how to swim, and became a triathlete. And the rest, as they say, is history.
So you were competing in the sport and competing very well at the sport. You were doing extremely well, but also dealing with your own internal struggles during a lot of that time. Can you share some of your story about working through and dealing with dysphoria?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You see those pictures of what a triathlete looks like and what a triathlon uniform looks like, and it is a very body conscious uniform. It is spandex, and so for me, it was really a struggle coming into the sport. When you're running, you can wear baggy shorts, you can wear a loose shirt and still run and compete. But there's very specific gear requirements for triathlon. So that was one issue that I had kind of coming in. And the other was swimming. I'm not a swimmer, and so swimming is definitely my weakest link in triathlon. But it was not easy for me to want to be motivated to become better at swimming, because I had to go to the pool. And so no matter how I was presenting, this was pre-transition when I started triathlon, no matter how I was presenting in the outside world, I would have to go in and put on a women's swimsuit in order to get in the pool. And to get to the pool, I would have to walk through the women's locker room, because that's the only way into the pool is through a locker room. And for me, that was a really tough time, because it made me sort of hate everything about sport, about my body, in that hour and a half that I had to be in the pool.
That is a very real feeling there. I think that a lot of trans individuals and people that do experience gender dysphoria have that same experience with swimming. I know it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere right now, and there are a lot of opportunities to swim. And I remember, being, pre-transition, having some of those same feelings, not in a sporting situation, but just in a relaxation situation where I was always the person who was wearing a shirt at the pool. I just did not like exposing my body. I didn't feel comfortable being at the pool. So a lot of weird, bad memories around that for me as well. And I'm sure a lot of other people out there can relate to that as well. At what point in your life did you first experience those feelings?
I think it was really starting to train for triathlon that I started to feel those specific feelings. And I remember, going on vacations and absolutely loving the beach and maybe not feeling totally connected with my body, but feeling comfortable enough. And, I don't think that gender dysphoria or body dysmorphia was a huge part of my experience. There was really just one part of myself that didn't feel like it connected to who I knew that I was, and that was my chest. And so, um, I was binding for a while before transition, and that seemed to help a little bit. But in a sporting context, it is very, very challenging to bind and to work out, and I do not recommend it for anyone to wear a binder that constricts your breathing when you're going to be running or biking, and especially swimming, something that could cause a lot of chafing. So I did try to think of like creative ways around that, because there weren't sports specific gear intended to flatten the chest while working out. Maybe there is now. I don't know. There might be new products out since I was doing that, but that was definitely a challenge to try to navigate that. Feeling comfortable enough to show up at the gym and even outside of swimming, and then not be focused entirely on what I thought other people were thinking of me, but just be focused on my workout. And so, I think that was it was really liberating for me to have top surgery, to then focus more on what I should have been doing, which was my workout, my swimming, and being physically active and training.
And that's a great example too of how some individuals do use surgical procedures to alleviate those concerns and that dysmorphia or the dysphoria, whatever it is in that situation. I know for me personally that the procedures that I've had, every time that I've undergone one, that it almost it's a huge relief, right? There's that extra mental cycles that used to be focused on this aspect of myself that was just consuming me or distracting me. And just not having to go through that process in my head just freed my mind so much more. And those affirming surgeries were a big part in being able to, come into who I am today.
Yeah, and I definitely acknowledge that, it's not everyone's experience is the same, right? And so not everyone wants to have surgery, not everyone has surgery, and it doesn't make anyone more or less trans than someone else. And, for me, that was just the one thing that I knew that I had to do. And it was actually, I did it before I started testosterone. And I thought that maybe that would make me feel more in alignment and at home in my body. And it did, but also I realized that it didn't satisfy all my requirements to be seen as the person that I knew that I was deep down inside, and to be acknowledged and to navigate the world as I knew that I was. And so, testosterone helped bring that vision a little bit more into alignment. But I just want to say that it doesn't make it's not required, and it doesn't it's certainly not required to be an athlete. I think this is one of the areas that people get really confused about, is that there's not just one way to be a trans person, or not just one way to be a man or to be a woman. There's not just one way to be a transgender athlete. And so the different ways that position can impact where we end up in sport.
So important to bring that up, and you're absolutely right. It's a point that's so important. It needs to be said again. There is no right way to transition. Surgeries are not a requirement for anybody out there. Our journeys are our own and very unique. And to something that you mentioned there, Chris, we don't necessarily have to know where our journey is going to take us at the start. There's no way of knowing where we're going to end up. We may decide later on that we need more. But that's our prerogative. That's everyone's own journey. And I think there needs to be understanding of that as well, that you don't owe anybody a full rundown of everything that's going to happen to you over the next 10 years of your life. You're allowed to explore yourself. You're allowed to explore your identity and do what you need for yourself. Yeah,
that's such a good point, Samantha. I mean, it needs to be restated again. There's not just one way to do it, and no one's journey looks the same as somebody else's. And and we do have the right to change our minds along the way. And I think the best thing for me in my transition was when I began to worry less about what other people would think about what I was doing, and more about what I wanted. I think one of the challenges, and I know this is definitely not unique just to me, I hear this from a lot of people, but I spent so much time focusing on what other people would think about my decisions, or what they would say, or how they would treat me, and a lot of this, especially how they would treat me, I really made up a lot of stories, because I didn't know how they would actually treat me. I just filled in the blanks myself. And so all of that time that I spent worrying about what other people would think about me delayed me actually doing what I needed to do in order to be happy. And so as soon as I started to focus on that, my life got a lot better.
So let's talk about that moment when you finally knew, okay, I can't put these thoughts aside anymore. I've got to move forward with this. What was that like for you?
I think it was just the realization that I would not be around for my next birthday if I didn't make a change. And it was the recognition that I didn't ever think that my life would be like that. And like that to me meant, just not being seen in the world in the way that I saw myself. And I kind of phrase it that way because I always had a very strong sense of myself. I knew who I was when I was a young kid. I was a very confident young kid. And then somewhere along, like high school, college, somewhere along that time, it kind of got shook out of me a little bit. And I think that was when I was navigating the world and having these interactions that didn't seem like they fit my version of myself. So that moment of knowing that I had to do something really was the realization that it was really damaging to me to exist in the world as I was.
And it's a scary place to get to. It's a scary point to be. It's definitely not a unique place to find yourself. I found myself in a very similar place where I knew I was out of options. I was out of excuses. I needed to finally address it, or much like yourself, I wouldn't be here for my next birthday. And I know that's sort of a difficult subject to talk about. It is a difficult subject, but it's also important for people to understand. People who have a hard time understanding why transition, why go through this process. And I think the important takeaway from that is that, well, we want to be here. None of us wanted to be in that situation. None of us wanted to have those feelings. But this is a matter of survival.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I think it really is. And what I actually love about sharing these experiences and about talking to other people in the community is that I didn't have other people in the community that I was friends with or that I was talking to when I was starting my transition. And actually, even now, I can say, in my experience in both New York and Chicago, I really don't have a trans community like in real life. And so, I meet a lot of people when I'm doing events and speaking and things like that, but those are very quick conversations. And I have a social media, group of folks, but to actually sit down and share stories and have meaningful time with people in the community is really rare for me. But every time that I do, it's reassuring to me that that it's not a singular experience. Because my experience leading up to transition really felt like I was the only one in the world that this was happening to, that there couldn't possibly be another person out there who had the same feelings or felt like I did. And it's just really reassuring to go, even though we have different paths, different journeys, different ways that we express ourselves, that there are these, universal truths to our experience that just sort of are comforting to know that, somebody else can relate to that experience.
Absolutely. There's so much value in community. I know I've found a lot of great people who have helped me, supported me, and also helped me understand, just what's possible as well. And to your point, community isn't just who's available in your neighborhood, right? It's online, it's through media, it's through interviews, it's through visibility as well. So I think those are all, wonderful ways of better understanding ourselves and feeling not as alone. But I do want to talk a little bit about the responses that you received when you first came out from your teammates, from your family, and from your friends.
Yeah, I had a a pretty smooth, you know, pretty smooth telling other people moments. And I think I had actually a really good reaction from my straight and cisgender teammates in triathlon and the running community, which was really awesome. I think sport is something that just kind of transcends differences. We value diversity on the team because every player needs to bring a different skill to the team for us to accomplish a goal. And so I think there's something sort of inherent in that about, loving and accepting your teammates. It's that sort of, your teammates become your family in a lot of ways because you spend so much time with them. And so I was fortunate to have already established myself as an athlete and as a strong athlete. And so when it came time to transition and tell people, I really received a lot of love and support because they acknowledged that I was a great athlete, a great teammate, and a great leader in our community. And so that was definitely a benefit for me. I had a little bit more of a challenging time at work. In the workplace, I had a lot of concerns, and that was a pretty challenging experience, particularly coming out to about 2,000 people kind of all at once. And, there were moments there that were a little bit more challenging. And, I was fortunate enough to have, great family support. And so while there was a learning curve that happened, certainly because I was the first trans person that a lot of people in my inner circle had met, particularly in my family, there was a little bit of a learning curve, but at the end of the day, it was, I think everyone in my family wanted me to be happy and healthy and knew that this was something that I needed to do. And so I've been very blessed to have that sort of support.
I'm glad to hear that. Not everyone has that experience, but it's always nice to hear. And it's not as rare. It's not as rare, though, for there to be largely supportive families. Not as rare as it used to be. So it's always reassuring to hear other people have good experiences with their families as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really important also to point out just real quick, that I really think that I experienced a smoother transition in social circles because I was transitioning into this sort of male privilege. And so I really think it's important for me to point out because I was not seen either athletically or within my community as a threat in any sort of way. I think that this is certainly the narrative in my sports career is that, people kind of shrug their shoulders and they're like, oh, you want to compete with guys, go ahead, have fun. And no one expected me to do well. No one expected me to be successful. And, I think that the sort of trifecta of having white privilege, inheriting this male privilege and being perceived then as a straight white man, I identify as queer, but, perception was I was a straight white man. And so in a lot of circles, that gave me sort of this pass to kind of fly under the radar, and not experience as much transphobia as a trans woman or a trans person of color or a trans person in the South. I transitioned in a big city. And so all of those things certainly work to my advantage in my transition. And I think it's important to note that that's not everyone's experience. And I acknowledge that.
Very important to recognize that and to talk about that here. I'm glad you brought it up. Looking at athletes in particular, trans athletes, I hear what you're saying, and I've seen what you're saying, where trans feminine athletes do come under much more scrutiny than trans masculine athletes. And that sort of leads us into the next part of our conversation here, and that's with how you got involved in working with the International Olympic Committee and reviewing the status of trans athletes competing at both the Olympics and Olympic competing events. So I do want to talk a little bit about that, what your experience was like and what drove you to make that push to better define trans athletes' rights.
Yeah, so there was a policy existing, and it was called the Stockholm Consensus, and it basically said that there was a set wait time of hormone use for a trans athlete to compete in the Olympics or any competition governed by Olympic policy. So that could be any of the national governing bodies for any country, and world championships as well. There was also a requirement at that time for an athlete to have a full lower surgery, internal and external genital modification in order to compete in the sport. And so when I made Team USA in 2015, I made the team, but I was actually banned from competing in the World Championship under that policy. And so I challenged that policy with the help of some amazing lawyers from Canada to try to get it to change. And so at the end of 2015, that got pushed through. And so the International Olympic Committee removed the requirement for surgery and shortened the wait time for transgender women to take testosterone blockers and treatment. And they shortened it from 2 years to 1 year. And then they actually removed all the hormone requirements for a trans man. And they said that whether or not a trans man is taking testosterone or not taking testosterone, he can compete with men. If you're taking testosterone, you have to get a therapeutic use exemption form just so that everything is medically checked out. But the requirement was actually removed. So that happened at the end of 2015. So that I was able to compete in the 2016 World Championship race. And, it was really amazing because I knew that it would impact not only my ability to compete, but really open the doors for every athlete after me. One problem with this is that not every organization has actually picked this up. And so there are still, in the United States, national governing bodies like USA Buck, for example, or USA Gymnastics, that still requires an athlete to have surgery. So, essentially, there are a great number of transgender athletes who are blocked from competition, particularly at elite and high levels, because of that requirement. And so, my hope is that more organizations will move to match that policy, because essentially the policy is only in effect at high-level competitions like the Olympics, World Championships, and things like that. So it is possible, and it's not against the law for one of these organizations to have these discriminatory policies in place still.
Sounds like there's still a lot of work to do out there then.
Yeah, absolutely. And on all levels, in elite competition is really where we start to see more discrepancy in beliefs of what is appropriate for trans athletes, and particularly for transgender women. And this is a fight that we're seeing not only in the elite competition level, in organizations like powerlifting right now and weightlifting competitions, but also in the collegiate and high school levels now, which is really ridiculous because the policies for youth and for young people should definitely not be the same as policies for Olympic level athletes. At the youth level, what we want is to push for inclusion. We want all young people to have the opportunity to participate in sports with their peers, to get all of the good benefits that people get out of participating in sports, and learn those values that come along with that participation. And we're seeing right now, and again, it's young trans women and trans girls of color who are really being targeted by these policies.
Absolutely. I am curious, during this campaign to update the IOC's regulations and rules, what type of feedback were you receiving from athletes and even from the general public at that point in time? I'm curious if it was positive or negative, somewhere in between.
I think it was somewhere in between. I think, again, I really had the benefit of flying under the radar in a lot of ways because people didn't expect me to do well and didn't expect me to be competitive. And so, my story kind of didn't make as big of headlines as any of the transgender girls who are trying to compete because, again, like I wasn't seen as a threat. And unfortunately, for many people, a trans girl even saying she wants to compete is thought of as a threat in some communities. And we're seeing that right now with a lawsuit that's being brought up and different, organizations sort of pushing back against their participation.
Yep, there is a lot of that going on right now, unfortunately, and this is going to be a topic for quite some time. The fight has just begun in a lot of ways. Yeah. We're just now getting into it. Since the ruling went through, your visibility has increased significantly in sport in general. You've been featured in ESPN, the magazine. You've worked with Nike on multiple campaigns as well. How have you been able to use that visibility to increase your advocacy for trans athletes in sports?
I think you said it earlier. Visibility is really key, and I think that visibility is a powerful tool for social change. And it's my intention to use this visibility to talk about the discrepancies in policies and to talk about the discrimination that still exists, and particularly to highlight the differences between my experience and any of the trans women who are participating in sports, because I know that they are not afforded the same sort of platform or opportunity to share their experiences. And so really what I want to do is be a mirror for the community, somebody that's, young people and other athletes can see themselves in when they see a Nike ad or a magazine article. And I also want to be a megaphone for their experiences and really amplify, and share so that more people can hear that we do exist, we do want to participate in sport, and we deserve the opportunity to do so just like everybody else.
Absolutely. So here we are now. It's June of 2019. We're a little more than a year away from the kickoff of the 2020 Summer Olympics. Can we expect to see you in Tokyo next year?
You can certainly expect to see me trying to be there. Absolutely.
I think that'll be amazing. And we're rooting for you. We all are. I think the whole world is.
Oh, thank you so much.
So today, what work are you doing to support trans athletes?
Yeah, so I have since 2013 run the website transathlete.com. It is, single athlete, transathlete.com. And that is a site that I created out of my own sort of experience of not seeing policies out there when I started to transition. My experience when I first started telling people, like in running organizations and triathlon, that I wanted to transition was that I couldn't find the policy, so I had to email people and tell them my story. And then after that, they would say, I don't know what to do with you, and then copy 5 more people on an email. And suddenly I'm on a thread with 19 people at some organization with all of my information there, feeling outed to everybody. And I really just didn't want someone else to have that experience. And so I gather all of the existing policies and put them on this website, and then also use that as an way to leverage for change by using the policies that exist. So I can take a good policy from a state high school organization, for example, and go to a state with a bad policy or with no policy and sort of offer that up as a way for them to change. So it's been a really cool tool to create change, to inspire organizations to do this work. And then also for me to consult with organizations to help them make sure that they have a good, inclusive policy.
That's such an amazing tool. And it's such a big issue in the trans community, lack of concise, consolidated information to help people through transition. So that you're putting that together and running that, maintaining that, that is such a great resource. I'm so glad it's available for trans athletes out there. Thank you for putting that together.
Yeah, thank you. And it's also for coaches and people who work at organizations who are looking for more information about how to support trans athletes, for PE teachers all the way up to athletic directors at colleges and national governing bodies. It's a great resource for them to get more information. And specifically even starting with terminology, for example, one of the things is we can't begin to have these conversations if we're not all speaking the same language. And I find that just basic terminology is a barrier for some people to begin to have this conversation to create change in their organization. So it goes from very basic up to a little more advanced in terms of policy and legal stuff, but it's all on there.
Awesome. Now we do have some viewer questions we want to get to. So if you are watching live on either YouTube or Facebook right now and you have a question for Chris or myself, put it in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can. First, we are going to take a look at the questions that were submitted earlier in the week through Instagram. And the first question is, were sports a way of escaping from dysphoria, or did they worsen it for you?
I think it was a way that I connected to myself initially as a young person. Like I found that I felt like I was valued and accepted by people around me because I was a good athlete and they wanted me on their team. And I really appreciated that. I think as I got older and as I left sport in college, organized sport, I still played recreational sports, but didn't see myself at that time being on a women's team. And I didn't know that that was really what I was experiencing, but I backed out of college athletics for that reason. When I started to run again after college or in college, that was very much a way for me to try to manipulate my body. I thought that if I was running and lifting some weights, maybe I could like have a little more broader shoulder appearance or slim down in certain areas. And I really thought that running and working out in the gym could help that. And so for me, I guess it was a way to sort of deal with body issues that I wasn't really sure that I had. I wouldn't have named them that, but that was definitely what I was doing at the time.
All right. Next question here. What do you recommend for young trans athletes who are being kept from competing with the gender they identify as?
I would recommend that they reach out to me. They can DM me on Instagram at the Chris Mosier or contact me through my website, and I will help them either by giving them the resources that they need to talk to whoever it is or find them legal help. There are fortunately a number of really great advocates who are lawyers, who work at legal organizations, who have helped me a number of times with working with young people specifically to challenge policies and to challenge organizations and get them to change. So I think that, a young person shouldn't have to advocate for themselves, and that's a really terrible position to be in. I know it felt like a terrible position even as an adult. I didn't love advocating for myself. So it really is my mission to advocate for other people and help them through their process. So I would just recommend they reach out to me because every situation is different.
That's so incredible that you offer yourself up to support other individuals going through issues here. And you're right, we shouldn't have to advocate, right? Not everyone wants to be an advocate, but to have champions like yourself out there who are willing to stand up in the community for the community, that's incredible and commendable. So thank you for that work, Chris.
Thank you. I really feel like it's my responsibility. I have this platform, and it's really, I think this is the best use of it.
All right, let's get to our next question here. It's one we touched on a little bit earlier. Do other athletes underestimate you?
Absolutely. I think so. And I think they definitely did at the beginning. I think more and more now, it's actually really cool to go to national championships and go to world championships and have people kind of recognize me and acknowledge me. And so I think that people know that I'm a strong competitor now if they are, within the community. But I absolutely feel like people don't think that I will succeed. And I definitely use that as fuel to inspire me to do my best.
Do you have any specific stories about anybody in a competition or anything like that where they didn't take you seriously or anything like that?
I think that there's always a little bit of sizing up that happens at the beginning of a race and kind of, especially for the folks who line up at the starting line. For a race of any size, a starting line can only hold 15 people who are right toes against it. And so it took me actually a long time to acknowledge that I belonged there, that I should be up towards the front. And once I finally, made my way up there, I definitely remember the first race that I won overall, being up there with the guys and kind of sizing everybody up. And I ended up winning the race by about 2 minutes. So the second place guy came in at 2 minutes. And the one thing that I love about sport is that it's always at the end, at the finish line, particularly in multi-sport, duathlons, triathlons, and things like that, that there's just such camaraderie and, good sportsmanship that happens at the end. And so we gave some high fives and good jobs and didn't really chat too much after that. But a couple of days later, the second place guy found me on Facebook. And if you go to my Facebook, it is, all about being a trans athlete. And he messaged me and said that he was the second place guy and that, good race. And also, I just want to acknowledge that I think it's really cool what you're doing. And so, that was one of those experiences where, he could have definitely had a different reaction when he found out that I was trans. It could have gone a number of different ways. And I just really appreciated that, by and large, I've had the support of people in the racing community.
Yeah, that is a really nice reaction from them. All right, next question here. What has been most surprising to you about how the public has reacted to your stories and achievements?
Surprising. I guess it's always interesting to me to see what stories get picked up and what stories don't get picked up. And I definitely have had a lot of media attention, and I mean a number of articles and 3 global Nike campaigns, and I've naked in ESPN magazine. I've definitely been exposed. Maybe that wasn't the right word. I've definitely had my story put out there, but I'm always interested to see what gets picked up and what doesn't. And so, in a lot of ways, I've been very fortunate that my story has not been picked up negatively. But at the same time, I don't know that, that it really gained the traction in being the first. I don't know that it really gained the traction that I thought that it might. And again, I think this is actually, a benefit, because the people's story who have had traction, a lot of that in the trans community comes in a very negative light in the sports context. And so I think I've just been able to maintain this balance of being visible and visible enough for the people who need to see me. And then, but not being too visible that I get a ton of hate. I definitely have some trolls online, and I definitely have a fair amount of negative comments, but I think I've just kind of hit that balance, and that was actually kind of surprising to me.
Okay, we do have a couple questions from our live stream here, so excuse me while I'm reading off my phone. We have a question from Amelia, and the question is, how do we advocate for trans feminine athletes, since they are almost always the ones being scrutinized by those who would have discussions about trans athletes? And what are some of the facts or talking points that support trans feminine people or trans feminine athletes competing with cis women?
Yeah, this is definitely the hot topic right now. And I'm dedicating a section on my website to sort of a lit review of all of the articles that are out there as supporting facts for this, so that my intention will be that when it's complete, that you can just send anybody to this page and all the answers will be right there. I think one of the arguments is it's really rooted in a lot of stereotypes and misunderstandings. And I think, again, we have to go back to, this is also rooted in sexism. Essentially, people believe that anyone assigned male at birth will be bigger, faster, stronger, a better athlete than someone assigned female at birth. In many ways, I contradict that in some ways. And so, I think it's really interesting to say that, it's a very sexist assumption that a trans woman would dominate in sports. Trans women have been competing in sports for decades, and we haven't seen the end of women's sports, and that's because trans women belong in sports with women, particularly at that elite level when satisfying the requirements of the international law. We've seen that levels the playing field. Sport is inherently based on having advantages, and it's really interesting what quote unquote advantages people want to hone in on, whether they're real or perceived. And I think there's the perception that a trans woman has substantial advantages, and that's not the case. So my kind of go-to point is that based on the best doctors and medical experts' opinions at this point, the policy for elite competition says that 1 year of cross-hormone therapy, of testosterone suppression and estrogen treatment levels the playing field for trans and cisgender women. And I think that we've seen that to be true in the way that results have come down. The other point to this is that it's not enough to allow us to compete, like trans athletes to compete, and allow us to win, right? And so there are a lot of factors that go into winning as well. And for people to, say that the only reason a trans woman would win is because she was assigned male at birth, really negates all of the hard work and training that goes into being an athlete. And so there are a lot of arguments there. I definitely try to stay away from the amateur biologists online. Everybody has an opinion right now, and I think that it's really better to leave it rooted in facts. And also, I understand that there are people who have their minds so made up on this. This is really one of those topics where I was on a radio show recently, and they took callers, and when callers would call in, they were actually angry. Like, people were yelling on the phone, and and they have no skin in the game. Like, they're not athletes themselves. So it was really interesting to see that people are just really, really deeply divided on this, and there's a lot of opinions out there that have no factual backing. It's just sort of based on stereotypes. A lot of it is based on the stereotype of someone transitioning, in their late 20s, who was a football linebacker who now wants to play, soccer on a women's team or something. I think that people have they've made trans women into caricatures, and it's completely false. And so hopefully my page will be a better resource to kind of give more concise answers, but definitely know that not everyone is worth arguing with.
That is the truth. You have to pick your battles, especially online, right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
All right, we had one more question from the chat. This is from Jen. Do people who are athletes and people who aren't react differently to you while you're competing, or just to you in general?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really think that I get different reactions. I think that it's funny that I either get kind of a shrug, I kind of get a non-reaction, or there's that subset of people who play the you're so inspiring for existing sort of angle, which is nice, and I want to be an inspiration to young people. But more than anything, I think I want to be aspirational. I want people to see me and not be inspired to be like me, but be more inspired and aspire to be themselves. And so the reactions have kind of changed over time as well. But I haven't noticed a substantial difference in the sports community versus not.
I love the way you said that, though, to aspire to that level. And I know, I was just looking at the chat, there actually are some trans athletes in that chat right now who do aspire to the work that you've done. And I think that's so incredible. And I look up to you. I'm not even an athlete,
thank
but
you so much.
Your voice in the community is so important, and it's going to continue to be important because, as we've discussed about tonight, there is still so much work left to do.
Yeah, and part of that work, I just want to say, is not just me doing the policy work and supporting people as they challenge policies as well, but also to bring voice to young trans athletes and older trans athletes too. But been able to do that by being an executive producer on a documentary called "Changing the Game," which features 3 young transgender athletes, and it's really a story that humanizes the voices. And I think that's one thing that's been left out of this conversation, particularly as people are drilling in on young trans girls in high school sports, is forgetting that they're people, that they are young teenagers, and that they can't possibly imagine the stress that this is putting on them. So it really humanizes their stories, which is cool. And then the other thing is, I really strongly believe in community, and you had mentioned earlier about how important that is. I've created a sort of secret private group on Facebook for transgender athletes to have community, to talk to one another, because there are some parts of our experience that are very unique to being trans. And I know it would have been helpful for me to have been able to chat with somebody about it as I was going through it. So I've created that safe space for trans athletes. If anyone is a transgender athlete or non-binary athlete and wants to be a part of it, they can just go to my Facebook page or to my Instagram and ask for membership. It is a closed private group because I want there to be some gatekeeping. I want it to be a safe space. But it's open to anyone who identifies as trans or non-binary and wants to, is comfortable with telling other people that and wants that community.
All right, and there's your Facebook page there. That is actually it for viewer questions for tonight. So let's do a quick recap then of how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the number one way is on Instagram. It's at the Chris Mosier, but it's actually at the Chris Mosier across all platforms. On Twitter, I post a lot of policy and current event stuff, and on Facebook as well. And the Facebook would be a great way to get access to that group if one was interested. And then thechrismosier.com or transathlete.com for those resources.
All right, that's awesome. Chris, this has been a wonderful conversation here tonight. I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy. Thank you for spending it with us and answering a whole bunch of questions.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the work that you do. This is great.
Thank you so much. And thanks to Addison in our Trans IRL control room for her work behind the scenes tonight. We will be returning in 3 weeks with our next live episode. We hope to see you back here on the show. In the meantime, you can find our previous episodes online on YouTube under Trans IRL. So from all of us here, thanks for watching and have a great evening.